I've long been an advocate of buying used guns for cost-effective personal defense and sporting tools. Yesterday, I had the chance to pick up a Glock 19 Gen 5 for a great price of $450 with the Ameriglow night sights and 3 mags. While it's hard to go wrong buying a used Glock pistol, I did want to break it down and inspect it, and in the process I want to show you some of the things I look for when I'm looking at a used gun, in particular a used Glock. To begin, we're going to make sure that it's clear. To disassemble the Glock pistol, you must dry fire to release the striker spring tension, which is one reason that it's especially important to make sure that the firearm is clear before you proceed any further. So remove the magazine. Confirm it's clear, visually and physically. Give it a few good racks. Pull the trigger. Now, to separate the slide from the frame is an easy process. Make sure that the trigger is in the rearward position. This indicates that the striker isn't cocked. Grab the rear of the frame like so with your thumb and the rest of your hand looping over. Pull it slightly back and pull down on the locking tabs. Allow it to come forward and separate your components. Now you're left with the slide and the frame. To field strip the slide is easy. You have a recoil spring. On the Gen 3, this will be a single, Gen 3 and earlier will be a single spring. On the Gen 4 and 5, you have a dual coil recoil spring. Simply compress that, lift it up and away, and do the same thing for the barrel. Now this is where our examination can begin. You can see from some of the wear that this gun has been used a little bit. In particular, we've got wear inside where the barrel hood rides, and a little on the breech face, indicating that the gun has been chambered and cycled frequently. We want to look all over for any cracks or any unusual wear. I've seen guns broken here at the rear rails. Want to make sure that everything's in good condition, and we want to examine the breech face also for any cracking, pitting, or other damage. So far, other than a little normal wear, everything looks good. We're going to do the same thing with the frame. Frequently, when I have seen cracks, they're usually up here above the pins. This was a bigger problem on Gen 4 and earlier models where you had a third pin that was located closer to the top of the frame, and that could leave some weakness. So we're just going to check it all over, look for any wear, any cracks. We want to make sure that these steel inserts in the frame are seated and not damaged. And judging by the inside of this gun, it really hasn't been fired much. If anything, more than likely, it was probably handled and cycled more than it was actually fired. Now, to continue our inspection, we're going to break this down a little bit further. We're going to begin by removing the back plate, which holds all of these components in place. So to do so, you'll notice that the firing pin has a cup or sleeve that surrounds it, and we can press down on this to remove the tension that it puts on the back plate. While doing so, simply push the back plate off with your thumb, and be careful to push your thumb in this direction because this extractor depressor plunger can come rocketing out of the back of the gun. With that in place, you can pull rearward on the tab on the firing pin, and you can remove the extractor depressor plunger. To get the extractor out, it's going to be retained by the firing pin safety. So depress that, and the extractor will come free like so. With everything else out of the slide, now your firing pin safety should come out. Might need just a little bit of help. And that is essentially a detail stripped Glock slide. Believe it or not, for most cleaning and inspection, Q-tip is about the only tool I use for cleaning the Glock. I noticed that whoever had this before oiled the inside of the firing pin channel, which is not something that Glock recommends. This is actually a self-lubricating, self-cleaning surface, and oiling or greasing the inside of it can disrupt the cycling process. But I'm just going to clean up in here, remove the loose oil and grit, swab out the extractor channel, and now I can get a nice look inside. You can see that the firing pin channel is nice and clear, no obstruction, and same thing for the extractor depressor plunger channel. Again, your firing pin and all of its components should not be externally lubricated. I'm just going to remove what I see here. Any lubrication here can actually increase the fouling and remove the gun's ability to naturally cycle it out. Going to look at the condition of our firing pin. And we want to see that it's not broken in any way, chipped, or anything like that. Everything looks to be in good condition here. Again, I'm not expecting to find anything wrong with this gun in particular. This is just a general inspection. Clean out the inside of that cup. We want to look at the extractor depressor plunger. A common mistake with these is to insert them actually backwards. It's an easy trick to remember is steel on steel and plastic on plastic contact. So the steel part should interface with the extractor, and the plastic part should press up against the plastic back plate. If you get that backwards, all of a sudden you now have plastic pressing against steel in both directions, which can cause the sensitive surfaces to mushroom out, and that can cause failures. I'm going to look at the extractor also. Make sure that it's got a nice sharp surface here, capable of catching the round. You can see where this has been fired a little bit, enough to gather some fouling here. Just swab that away. Again, just keeping this free of debris is the goal here. You don't really need to lube your extractors, because that lube can mix in with the fouling and cause this to get gummy. So everything looks good in the slide, so we're going to put it back together real quick. We're going to do that essentially in reverse order. I did forget to clean our firing pin safety, so we're going to swab him real quick. Sorry for the interruption there. I'm recording on my Google Pixel phone, and I got a call I had to take. But we're right back to putting the slide back together, which we're going to do in reverse order. The Gen 5 firing pin safety rotates rather than depresses up, so it actually will only go in one direction, whereas earlier generation firing pin safeties can go in any way. And you just want to make sure that you have good spring tension there, that when you press down it will lift back up. And then with that captured, you'll see that it actually lines up a slot for the extractor. You just drop the extractor back in. Again, no lube is needed for any of these components when you're reassembling. And I just want to make note that while I had it vertical, that's the correct orientation for the firing pin safety, which you can tell because it will capture the extractor and hold everything together when it's inserted correctly. Replace the extractor to depressor plunger, remembering that we're going to place steel forward and plastic towards the back plate. And replace the firing pin spring. Excuse me, the firing pin assembly. I'm going to see if I can increase our angle of view here just a little bit. Bear with me. So now reinserting this back plate can be kind of tricky until you get the hang of it. The steel spring clips face inward. Essentially you want to depress the firing pin assembly, which can actually be done with your disassembly tool. By the way, this is I believe it's a Lone Wolf Glock disassembly tool. It comes with 3 different tools. It's about all you need to really work on one of these. I'll place a link in the description. You just want to compress the firing pin assembly and push it over, push the back plate over to capture it just like that. And then you're going to depress the extractor depressor plunger in the rear. Keep forward pressure on the back plate and then remove your tool while you snap the back plate into place. We have this field stripped for now, so we're going to separate that, and I'll go over lubing when we're ready to put the whole gun back together. Now, as far as the frame, it's pretty easy. Again, this is a 2-pin gun, which makes disassembly of this even easier. So you're going to take your tool here, just simply push on that pin. If it's stuck and it doesn't come through by pushing, something is not aligned right, and don't hammer on it, you're just going to damage something. So now our locking block is free. We can actually take this pin, just hook it up under the locking block, and use it to get it started like that. Pull the locking block out of place. We'll examine the locking block. This is what's going to bear the most of the pressure while the gun is cycling, so we don't want to see any damage here. No cracks, splits, anything like that. I've never seen one, but it is possible. And again, we're just going to clean that up a little bit. Really don't need to go crazy here cleaning Glock parts, especially if you clean them regularly so that the carbon doesn't have a chance to get baked in. And as far as solvent use, I rarely use solvents to clean any of these guns because there are some internal components that can be damaged by the solvents, and typically I just never have a problem removing it with normal methods without solvents. I'm going to lift out our slide lock slide release. Note that this is the Gen 5, which has the captured spring on it, as opposed to the earlier models, which would typically be on one side only and have a little spring that wraps around that has to be placed through the third pin. The last pin we have to remove is here in the back, and it's the trigger housing pin. Also note, if you have a Gen 4 or 5 gun that has exchangeable back straps, you'll need a longer pin, and this is the one that you'll be removing to exchange those. Just push that through just like the other, and now you can just pinch the ejector part of the trigger housing, lift up, and your whole trigger group will come free. Looking at your trigger group, we want to examine the trigger bar here. Make sure that it's nice and smooth, there's no chips, no cracks, nothing missing. This is the portion of the trigger bar that activates your firing pin safety and moves it out of the way. So this is responsible both for making the gun safe and for making it fire. And then back here, we're going to take a look at the connector and trigger bar interface. Again, we're just going to make sure nothing is obviously broken and everything looks good. This is where you'll see a lot of buildup sometimes in guns that are fired. See if this is an example right here. Just because this is a pretty open part of the system, this is where you actually get a lot of debris from the firing process. If you need to scrub a little, I just use a plastic brush. Again, this is the majority of the tools that I use for cleaning guns. Even Glocks that have had 1,000 or more rounds through them in a pretty short time frame, typically they don't require anything extensive to remove the debris that's built up. So now we're just going to do that in reverse order. Pinch your trigger bar to your trigger housing. Drop it in place, lining up your trigger. And it'll snap back into place. Take your trigger housing pin, push it back through, and it should snap in pretty easy. Again, if you have to hammer on these, something's wrong, so stop and don't. And just center the pin up, just like that. Going to replace our slide lock slide release. It's going to sit in position just like that. And then drop the locking block back in place. Take your locking block pin, insert it from right to left. Sometimes this can take a little bit of positioning, but when you get it, it'll go right in. Typically, if you are having trouble with these, they can be a little tight when they're new, but it usually has to do with the position of your slide lock slide release and how it lines up with that hole. Let's see if we can take that out there and show. You can see that the holes are not quite aligned, so instead of forcing it in, it really has to do with how you're lining up all those components. And sometimes giving it a little twist does help too, as you saw there. The more you disassemble these guns, the pins do wear in and they become easier to remove and install, but if they get to the point where they're just falling out, your frame is likely getting too worn for service. So now we have all of the major components separated. We're just going to go over lubrication real quick, and that's our full inspection of a used Glock. This gun looks great. Looks like it was fired a little bit, but nothing more than what I would consider probably a couple sessions for my use. So for the price, very happy with it. And I always feel confident buying a used Glock of all guns because of the way they stand behind their products. So for oil, there's only a couple of spots on the Glock you need to oil. So we're going to start with the top rails in the slide. And just a small amount is necessary. What I put on there might actually be more than we need, so I'm going to wipe away the excess. And by starting at the top of the rail, you can just allow the oil to slide down and lubricate the whole length. By the way, what I'm using here is Modern Spartan Systems Spartan Accuracy Oil. This is a company I've been affiliated with in the past. I like their products. If I'm not using this, what I like to use for Glocks that I use for training classes is Slip 2000 Extreme Weapon Lube. I find that holds up really, really well, and when stoppages do happen, it clears it real fast. To lube the barrel, I'm going to start with one drop on the barrel, one on the hood, and one on the bottom of the barrel lugs. If it makes you feel better to wear gloves, do that, and definitely always wear gloves when you're giving your gun a deep cleaning. We just want to spread a light film, so again, where I put too much excess, we're just going to take our patch, just wipe it down a little bit. These guns are engineered, by the way, to run with very little lube. It's not just me being stingy, but this is actually the way that Glock recommends you lube them. Place your barrel back in your slide. Place your recoil spring assembly. We now have our slide put back together. Wipe down our extra lube. We're also going to lube the mating rails inside the frame the same way we did. Just a little drop at the top of each. The last place that we really need lube is right here where the trigger bar and the connector interface, and we're just going to put a drop there. And again, that's per Glock specification. A little drop. And that's it. Now to put it back together, a little detail that's very important is to make sure that the rails on the slide ride over the rails on the frame before you try to cycle it the whole length. So we can see just like that, I have a good fit. Just go ahead, pull it back. I like to go ahead and cycle it a few times. Take a clean cloth or a shop towel or a rag, whatever you like. Mop up any excess lubricant that comes out when you cycle. And now we'll do our functions check. So again, making sure that the gun's clear. Poke something physically in the chamber, make sure there's nothing there. We're gonna first aim in a safe direction, pull the trigger and keep it to the rear, cycle the gun, and release your finger. The spring should push the trigger forward to the reset point and you'll hear an audible click. I'll go ahead and I'll pull the trigger one more time. And with the trigger depressed to the rear, this may not show up well on my camera mic, but if you give the gun a slight shake, you should hear that metallic ringing. That's the firing pin moving freely, so we want to check that to make sure that the firing pin is able to move where it needs to. And finally, I'm going to show you one point for barrel inspection that I missed earlier. It's something that just came to mind. So we're just going to field strip this real quick again. Now, I have once seen a barrel that was bulged right about here. I don't know whether that was from a squib load or an overpressure round or a bullet slightly oversized. Whatever the case is, excess pressure caused the barrel to bulge, making it unsafe. Well, a little bit of bulging can be hard to detect by eye, so an easy way to check is to actually take your slide and insert the barrel backwards. Make sure that it has plenty of movement, you can rotate it, and that it doesn't bind up at any point. Because if it binds up at any point, that means the diameter is bigger than it's meant to be and you probably have a bulge. The gun back together. And a quick tip here is to make sure that that spring is sitting on the correct ledge, because if it sits on this second ledge up here, it's actually not captured properly, and when you go to rack the slide, it'll be sticking out of the front like an extra long nose. It's an easy fix, but that's how you avoid that. Alright, so that's how we inspect and prepare a used Glock, in this case particularly a Glock 19 Gen 5. Pretty happy with this gun, looks to be in great condition for the price. So hopefully I'll get to get out and shoot it and share some video of that with you guys. Thanks, I hope you learned something from this, and if you want to see more gunsmithing content, please go ahead and subscribe, and also check out my website, potsprecision.com. Thank you.